1973 Old Bailey bombing. The 1973 Old Bailey bombing, known as Bloody Thursday in Britain, was a car bomb attack carried out by the Provisional IRA, which took place outside the Old Bailey Courthouse on 8 March 1973. The attack was carried out by an 11-person active service unit ASU from the Provisional IRA Belfast Brigade. The unit also exploded a second bomb, which went off outside the Ministry of Agriculture near Whitehall in London at around the same time the bomb at the Old Bailey went off. This was the Provisional IRA first major attack in England since the Troubles began in the late 1960s. One British civilian died of a heart attack attributed to the bombing. Estimates of the injured range from 180 to 220 from the two bombings. 2 additional bombs were found and defused. 9 people from Belfast were convicted 6 months later for the bombing. 1 person managed to escape and 1 was acquitted for providing information to the police. Background: the Troubles had been ongoing in Northern Ireland and to a lesser extent in the Republic of Ireland since the late 1960s. Rioting, protests, gun battles, sniper attacks, bombings, and punishment beatings became part of everyday life in many places in Northern Ireland. These events and others helped to heighten sectarianism and boosted recruitment into Irish Republican and Ulster Loyalist paramilitary groups and the security forces, mainly the newly created Ulster Defence Regiment. England had been relatively untouched from the violence up. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, Loyalist paramilitaries had bombed Dublin and other parts of the Republic of Ireland a number of times before the IRA began its bombing campaign in England. These early Loyalist bombings were carried out by the Ulster Volunteer Force and were small bombs aimed at destruction only, not injuring or killing anybody. Following the Dublin bombings in late 1972 and in January 1973 carried out by Loyalists which killed 3 people and injured over 150, the media attention these bombings received helped the IRA decide to take its campaign to Britain in return. Another reason the IRA brought their campaign to England, Billy McKee explained to journalist Peter Taylor, was that the IRA had decided to bomb England early if there was an emergency in the IRA and it began to weaken in. The arrest of top IRA personnel in both the Republic and Northern Ireland like Mayor Drum, Sean McSteofane, Ueri O'Bradig, and Martin McGuinness in late 1972 helped to convince the IRA to bomb England to take the heat off of the IRA in Ireland. The IRA selected the volunteers who would constitute the ASU for the England bombing operation, which was scheduled to take place on 8 March 1973, the same day that a border poll boycotted by nationalists and Roman Catholics was being held in Belfast. Volunteers from all 3 of the IRA Belfast Brigade battalions were selected for the bombing mission. The team included 19-year-old Jerry Kelly, 24-year-old Robert Roy Walsh, an expert bomb maker from Belfast, Euphemia Belfast-born IRA volunteer and explosives expert, and 2 sisters, Marion, 19, and Price. Bombing. Several days before the bombing, the leaders of the IRA ASU, which included sisters Marion and Price, went to London and picked out 4 targets: the Old Bailey, the Ministry of Agriculture, an army recruitment office near Whitehall, and New Scotland Yard. They then reported back to their officer commanding in Belfast, and the IRA Army Council gave the go-ahead. The bombs were made in Ireland and transported to London via ferry, according to Marion Price. The Royal Ulster Constabulary warned the British that the ASU was travelling to England, but were unable to provide specifics as to the target. The drivers and the volunteers who were to prime the bombs woke up at 6:00 a.m. and drove the car bombs to their various targets. Jerry Kelly and Roy Walsh drove their car bomb to the Old Bailey. It was planned that by the time the bombs went off at around 15, the bomb at New Scotland Yard was found at 8:30 by a policeman who noticed a discrepancy in the license plate. The bomb team started lifting out 5-pound bags of explosives and separated them so that if the bomb did go off, the force of the explosion would be greatly reduced. The bomb squad eventually found the detonating cord leads, which ran under the front passenger seat of the car. Peter Gurney, a senior member of New Scotland Yard, cut the detonator cord leads, defusing the bomb. However, at the Old Bailey the bomb exploded, injuring many and causing extensive damage. Scotland Yard stated it had warned the City of London police at 14:01 to search near the Old Bailey for a green Ford Cortina. The car was not located until 14:35 and exploded at 14:49 while police were evacuating the area. A shard of glass from the explosion is preserved as a reminder embedded in the wall at the top of the main stairs. Several more people were injured by the car bomb near the Ministry of Agriculture, which brought the total number injured to over 200. A British man, 60-year-old Frederick Milton, died of a heart attack. Dollars Price wrote in her memoir, "There were warnings phoned in, but people had stood about, curious to see. If people ignored the warnings and stood around gawking, they were stupid. The numbers of injured came about through curiosity and stupidity." The ASU was caught trying to leave the country at Heathrow Airport prior to the explosions, as the police had been forewarned about the bombings and were checking all passengers to Belfast and Dublin. All 10 gave false names that did not match their documents. Court and sentence. The IRA volunteers had to be tried at Winchester Crown Court sitting in Winchester Castle, as the Old Bailey was wrecked by the car bomb there. The trial took 10 weeks and was set amid extremely strict security. William McLarnon pleaded guilty to all charges on the first day of the trial. On 14 November 1973, a jury convicted 6 men and 2 women of the bombings. The jury acquitted Royson McNearney in exchange for information, and she was given a new identity. As her verdict was handed down, the other defendants began to hum the Dead March from Saul, and one threw a coin at her, shouting, "Take your blood money with you," as she left the dock in tears. 6 of the 9 people convicted admitted to provisional IRA membership. At the court, the judge sentenced the 8 to life imprisonment for the bombings and 20 years for conspiracy, while 19-year-old William McLarnon, whose family was forced out of their home in August 1969, was sentenced to 15 years. When his sentence was read out, he shouted up the provisional IRA. As the 8 were led to the cells below the court, several gave raised fist salutes to relatives and friends in the public gallery, who shouted, "Keep your chins up," and "all the best." The Price sisters immediately went on hunger strike, soon followed by Feeney and Kelly, for the right not to do prison work and to be repatriated to a jail in Ireland. The bombers on hunger strike were eventually moved to jails in Ireland as part of the 1975 IRA truce agreed with the British. In 1983, Kelly escaped from Maze prison and became part of an IRA ASU in the Netherlands. He was recaptured 3 years later by the Dutch authorities and extradited. Further IRA bombs in England. The Old Bailey bomb was the beginning of a sustained bombing campaign in England. The next major bombing by the IRA in England was the King's Cross Station and Euston Station bombings, which injured 13 people and did widespread damage. Another significant attack that year was the 1973 Westminster bombing, which injured 60 people. 2 more people would die in England from IRA bombings in 1973, bringing the total to 3 for the year in that part of United Kingdom. The next year, 1974, was the bloodiest year of the Troubles outside of Northern Ireland, with over 70 people being killed in the Republic of Ireland and England combined. 34 were killed in the Dublin and Monaghan bombings, 21 from the Birmingham pub bombings, 12 from the M62 coach bombing, and several people were killed by the IRA Balcombe Street gang. One of the Old Bailey bombers, Marion Price, explained the IRA reasoning for bombing England. "It doesn't seem to matter if it's Irish people dying. So if the armed struggle was to succeed, then it was necessary to bring it to the heart of the British establishment, hence symbolic targets such as the Old Bailey. The targets were carefully chosen.